morning, and welcome to You're 18, Now What? Thank you for joining me on this great Tuesday. I'm Dr. Catherine Gilstein, and I would look forward to empowering you with information about financial literacy and economic empowerment. I'll be posting new episodes every second and fourth Tuesday of the month. I thank all of you for continuing to support my work. Today, I have with me John DeGoey, who is a portfolio manager and author based in Toronto, Canada. His podcast, Make Better Wealth Decisions, explores financial decision making with an emphasis on practical considerations and the impact of behavioral biases. So, John, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure, Catherine. Thank you for having me.
No problem. So I want to start off with if you can tell us about why you think financial literacy is so important.
Well, I'll answer it first off generically, and then I'll see if I can speak a little bit about people that are 18-ish as well. So one of the ongoing challenges in personal finance for generations has been that the people who give financial advice have a hard time penetrating their audience, the people they serve, the people they give advice to, because the people who get the advice don't really understand finance. And they don't have the basic literacy that a lot of people who work in finance take for granted. So it's important because if you want to have a baseline, if you want to be able to be impactful in the advice you give, it's important that people understand not just the what, but also the why. You know, you need to pay down your credit card in full every month because you don't want to incur these penalties. You need to save for retirement because if you don't, you won't have enough time at the end of if you don't start until the middle of your career to make up for the time that you've forgotten. So financial literacy is critical in helping people to understand and to motivate them to actually take the actions they need to take, because they need to understand why it's important. And if they understand why it's important, they're more likely to do what needs to be done. With regard to young people, I think young people are an interesting group because a lot of them they're sponges. They want to learn things. And then a lot of others they're all over the map. They're on TikTok and doing other things, and they don't even think about financial literacy. They don't think about finance oftentimes because life is good. And I know I didn't think much about finance when I was 18. So it's, I think, a particularly interesting demographic because they really are all over the map in terms of what you're trying to teach them and the degree to which they're willing to learn.
Agreed. I know that when I speak to the younger generation, I let them know that you deserve representation. And there are so many financial advisors out there that will only work with people who are already established in their careers, who already have $1 million portfolio. And I really pride myself on working with the younger generation just to get them that start. And, to just let them know that they can go see a financial advisor, even if they're just starting out in their jobs, just to get them, a roadmap to begin with. So that's really great information. How can you test to see if your financial advisor suffers from blind spots that unknowingly can hurt your portfolio?
I've written 3 books, and one of my books is Stand Up to the Financial Services Industry, which is there over my shoulder. And it includes a number of questions that you can ask. So I'll see if I can go through that in a systematic way. First off, because of financial literacy, a lot of people don't even want to think about it. They don't want to ask the questions because they feel they're out of their depth. But then secondly, even if you had the courage to ask questions, you probably wouldn't have the wherewithal to know what questions to ask. So the book then gives you the questions. And then the third thing is, even if you had the courage to ask the questions, even if someone spoon-fed you the questions to ask, you probably wouldn't be able to discern whether or not the answers you're being given are indicative of biases that exist. So I also talk about these are the answers you should be looking for. So if you're not going to buy the book, I'll see if I can answer the question generically. There's a lot of research that shows that, for instance, low-cost investment options are superior over the long run on a balance of probabilities. If you start taking not just a 1 or 3, 5, 10, 20 years, that low-cost options usually come in the top quartile in terms of being in the top 25% of performers relative to the other investment options you might have available to you. Despite this, a lot of financial advisors will recommend high cost options because high cost options oftentimes involve higher profit margin for the advisor. So you can see that there's a possibility of a misplaced agency where the advisor is supposed to be giving advice in the best interests of the client, but in fact is allowing certain considerations to creep into the recommendations being made that are perhaps better for the advisor. So those are the sorts of things that you need to think about. You need to do some due diligence on the front end, and then you can sort of play dumb and ask the questions and then look for answers. And not only look for the answers, but try to understand the rationale behind the answer to see if the person is in fact using some sort of a bias in their perceptors, recommendations and their perceptions of what is right and wrong.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's important to make sure that you're dealing with someone who is a fiduciary so that they are acting in your best interest. And I think that's one of the key words that a lot of people aren't aware of. What questions can you ask to assess an advisor's credibility?
So you've already touched on the first one, Catherine. Are you a fiduciary? That I think in many ways is the one question which will determine whether or not the advisor is obligated to act in your best interest. So then you can start thinking about other questions about, well, how familiar are you with the research with regard to behavioral economics, with regard to the impact of cost? What about turnover and tax implications? And if you could ask the advisor to explain to you what his or her perception is of these things, because there's a lot of research that's out there. And I guess
Mhm.
the irony is that as the person asking the question, you need to be familiar with what the correct answers are, but you can probe to see whether or not the person giving you the advice is A, aware of the evidence, and then B, inclined to give you advice that is consistent with what it is that you're looking for. Hopefully, you're looking to build a portfolio that is going to get you better risk adjusted returns over a long time horizon on a balance of probabilities, but also someone who's going to help you with your financial planning considerations. So help me decide if I can plan for my student loans and if I can help my kids get started in maybe buying their first home or what have you. And those are the sorts of things where some advisors have generic expertise, but might not be able to give you a lot of details. So, who else have you helped in getting a house fund established so that my child who's maybe in their early 20s can buy a home before they turn 30, as an example.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's important to note that it has to be somebody who is familiar with your circumstances, and each circumstance is different. So it does need to be that personalized approach. What you want at 25 and 35 at 45 is going to look totally different for each different person at 25, 35, or 45. So I think asking those crucial questions of, have you worked with people who have less than $1 million in
Yeah.
in assets? Have you worked with people who are less than 50 years old that haven't been saving, for 20 years?
And one of the things I would say, Catherine, is that a big part of the role for financial advisors in general, and especially for people working with young people, is that you need to draw out those answers because a lot of people at the beginning of their life haven't really thought about it. I don't know, do I want to own a home? Do I want to have children? Do I want to, am I prepared to rent and then travel? When you ask people to focus on their greatest priorities and objectives in life, I know that I started university. I was in my late teens. I left home, and I wasn't even sure what I wanted to study, much less what I wanted to be when I grew up. So a lot of
Absolutely.
people, if you're trying to give them advice, they themselves sometimes don't even know the answer. You probably have to go back every couple of years because it's more of a work in progress, and it's you're finding out what it is that you want, and you don't even know who you are when you're in your late teens and early 20s. And so that process of self-discovery is one that a good advisor can help a young investor, a young client who might not even be investing. They might just be just paying their bills and getting a start in life. to help those people understand who they are, what their limitations are, what their likes and dislikes are, and then start crafting some recommendations based on those very personal, very different for everyone sorts of answers.
Absolutely. And I mean, this next question really goes to the premise for my book is that I have met so many students over the years that want to invest money. And there's so many books on investing, but I always go back to the basics. Well, let's talk about the difference between a credit card and a debit card first. Because not only are you just swiping your card, nowadays you're not even swiping your card, you're just tapping your phone over and over and over at the store. So you don't even know what you're spending in general. So when we look at the younger generation, they are so full of hope and optimism and idealism, but many want to begin investing before dealing with much more rudimentary things. So, what are some things that the young adults should be considering as that first priority or first principle when mapping out their financial futures? What are your suggestions?
I don't believe budgeting in a traditional sense works. So I don't believe you should write out a budget, but I do believe that you should live within your means. And you've got to distinguish between wants and needs. And a lot of
Mhm.
people, if you're just tapping your phone, and this is not necessarily just young people, it's adults too, because people of all
Absolutely.
ages just tap their phone. But if you're a young person and you've got a credit card and you don't pay the monthly bill because mommy and daddy pay the bill every month, you have, with great respect, you probably don't have a good sense of the value of money. And in terms of the advice that you should be getting is that you really need to be able to pay off your accounts in full, and you should be able to pay it off with your own money in totality every month when the amount is due. And that's the sort of thing that a lot of young people, and again, it's not entirely their fault. We're not always paying young people as much as they should be getting paid. And cash flow is the sort of thing that even if you have enough money, sometimes the money doesn't come in until
Mm,
8 or 10 days after the bill is due. And it's just a timing thing. So you need to be able to
absolutely.
be very careful at the beginning because it can affect your credit rating if you don't make your payments on time. So I think the most important thing that I would say is be sure to live within your means. And sometimes, speaking of the difference between a credit card and a debit card, that means not getting a credit card and paying with your debit card because if you don't have the money in your account, then you can't pay with a debit card. Whereas with a credit card, you can, but then you run into a problem by the time the bill comes due.
Absolutely. One of the things that I point out in my book is the difference between debt and debt, saving and savings, and income and wealth. And
Yeah.
basically, if you can control your debt early on, you can control your debt later on. If you control your
Yeah.
savings now, you control your savings then. If you control your income now, you can control your wealth moving on. So I think those are really good points. Um, how might a young adult with modest assets go about getting good financial advice?
That's really tough because you've touched on this yourself. A lot of people that work who give advice to retail clients are looking for clients with $500,000 or $1 million, and they're not working with the children. If you're lucky and your parents have that kind of asset base, it's probable that you'll be able to roll in and get some advice under the wing, under the auspices of the advice that your parents are getting from another advisor. That's easy, and that's probably 2 or 3% of the population. For the other 90 some odd percent of the population, you have to
Mhm.
be a little more, shall we say, inventive. I think the most important thing is living within your means, and you may not, candidly, you may not be able to get great advice. You might be able to get some rudimentary, not bad advice. So if you have a bank account, you might be able to speak to someone at a bank to give you some
Mhm.
modest tips on what to do. In many instances, when you're in your late teens and early 20s, we're not even talking about investing. We're talking about just paying your bills at the end of every month and not going into debt and being a responsible citizen who does what can be done. Beyond that, you should speak, you should look, don't be shy. Talk to friends who are getting advice to see if they can get it somewhere else. Hopefully your parents, maybe you've got a teacher if you're in senior high school, or if you're starting in college or university, you might be able to find a prof who can take you under their wing and give you some guidance. There are some good rudimentary textbooks that you can read if you're interested. I think part of the problem, we've talked about this already, is financial literacy is you can't get blood from a stone. And it's very difficult to get someone to care about financial literacy if they're not interested in finance to begin with. So now we're in this
Mhm.
catch-22 situation where we have a problem and it's difficult to solve. And I don't think there's a really easy solution, but I'm trying to put out the possibilities. Everyone's different, as we say. So between parents, teachers, peers, people that your parents are working with, people that you respect. Hopefully, you'll be able to tap on some people who can point you in the right direction. And the right direction is different for everyone because not everyone wants to go to get a college degree. Some people just want to enter the workforce right away. Okay, well then that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. But the advice that you get would probably be different for a person who wants to be a bricklayer as a trade at age 19 rather than someone who's first or second year at Illinois. And so now we've got different advice for different people because of not only their life stage but also their life trajectory. And different strokes for different folks. It's not like there's one bit of advice that works for everyone. Some people want to get straight to, buying a home and starting a family, and that's fine. We need that too.
Mhm. Absolutely. Um, so just some quick thoughts on a few things here. So your thoughts on credit cards versus debit cards.
They're both useful. They're both obviously going to be here to stay. We're not going to get rid of them.
Hmm.
The main thinking that I have is that if you are responsible and can pay off your credit card debt every month, then I'm indifferent between the two. If, on the other hand, you are the sort of person, and again, there's a lot of research that shows that if you're the sort of person who isn't paying off the amount in full when you're in your early 20s, chances are you won't be paying out the amount in full when you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s later in life. Meanwhile, there are other people who pay off their amount in full every month, and that tends to be something that you carry with you throughout your life, which is to say, a lot of the time at the beginning of your career as an adult, the frame is set, and people tend to get into behavioral patterns that oftentimes persist for your entire lifetime. And if you can get into good habits to begin with, then that's a wonderful thing. So then taking this back to credit cards, please get into good habits. And if you cannot, then maybe you should only have a debit card and you should not have a credit card in your late teens and early 20s because you might not be able to have the self-regulation that's required to be a responsible citizen to pay off everything in full.
Yeah, and the last thing you want to do is constantly chase the eight ball and to be in debt. That could be very stressful. What about the role of insurance for younger people?
If you have no dependents, if you're very young, if you're 18 or 19, chances are you have no dependents and you probably don't need insurance of any kind. Obviously, if you have a car, you have to have car insurance, but you're not going
Hmm.
to own a home and you don't have to insure your life or your ability to work. As soon as you start working, you will probably need some insurance for perhaps accident and sickness. And I don't think it's a stretch to say that it would be useful to have critical illness insurance as soon as there's a chance that you might become critically ill.
Hmm.
It's
Short-term,
extremely
long-term
rare.
disability.
Yeah, short term, long
Hmm.
term. All right. But when insurance comes into play is when you have a dependent spouse, dependent children, or a mortgage. As soon as you have someone or some ones and some things that are dependent upon your continued ability to earn money to pay those financial obligations that are down the road, then insurance is extremely necessary as a means of covering off those potential liabilities, which hopefully never come. Hopefully you don't die. But if you get hit, if you're in a car crash at age 24 and you've got a 23-year-old spouse who was a homemaker and a bun in the oven, with a child on the way, well, now you've got a spouse who's not earning money and not going to be able to earn money because she's pregnant and can't get
Hmm.
into the workforce, and a mortgage and no income and a child on the way. holy, did you ever need insurance? And if you were 24 and didn't have insurance, you have just put your loved ones in a huge, huge hole, and they're behind the 8 ball. So it's actually rudimentary. It's foundational. A lot of people, before they invest anything, should have insurance in place as something that is a first principle before they start getting on to next steps of actually investing.
Absolutely. This next one I really love: human advice versus robo advice. And we know everybody Googles everything, we search everything online, but we know everything online is not always the truth. So,
Yeah.
what's your advice as opposed for people to finding human advice versus that robo advice?
So let's go back to a question that you asked me 5 minutes ago, Catherine. You were
Mhm,
asking about, well, what can young people do to get advice and where can they get it? Because it's hard.
mhm,
A great option for many people on the investing side, again, this is now the foundational stuff, is your planning, your budgeting, and your insurance. But once you get to the
mhm,
point where you can actually start moving beyond that and start investing money, if you can't find a human advisor, I would say in most instances, a robo advisor is better than no advisor. So if you can fill out a comprehensive questionnaire that speaks to your risk tolerance and your risk capacity and can build a portfolio that's suited to your needs, that's low cost, low turnover, that you can stick to and hopefully put money aside every time you get paid. Even if it's just $50 or $100, whatever it is, so that you can get
mhm.
into the good habit of being a regular saver. Uh, a robo advisor is not necessary, but if that's the difference between taking action and sitting on your hands and not doing anything, then a robo advisor is definitely better than nothing. So I think robo advisors have a place. I think they're going to be growing in terms of the way the market segments itself. It mostly segments in two ways. A lot of people, and we human advisors are thankful for this, once they accumulate a certain amount of wealth, would rather work with a human being to talk about ideas and to strategize with regard to, should we do some tax loss selling and, various things that are very circumstantial, very personal, and you want to be a little more interactive. And also, of course, a lot of older people just don't like answering questions with a robot. Younger people, of course, are the exact opposite. They actually like to avoid human beings and they
Yes.
prefer to work in their element, and their element is everything is done online. And it's different strokes for different folks. It's not like it's right or wrong. We just have to understand that the market does a good job of segmenting itself. And if you're the sort of person who works better with a robot or virtual assistant, a person who can help you, certainly on the investing side, my concern, I guess, with the robo advisors is they sometimes move to the second and third questions before answering the first and second questions. So just be careful. Don't rush to start investing if you need insurance and don't have insurance in place, as a simple example based on what we've been talking about. You still need to make sure that you've got your ducks in a row and that you proceed sequentially and that you do the first things first. And robo advisors might not do a good job of stopping you and saying, wait, before you start investing, uh, are you sure investing is the right decision? Because you're working on the premise that it is. And in many instances, you should just be don't give me a nickel. Pay down your credit card. That's a, don't invest. Please do not. And I don't know how many robo advisors will actively tell you not to open an account. And hopefully, if the human advisor is ethical, and especially if that person is a fiduciary, will tell you, no, 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 no. The best thing you can do is to pay down your non-deductible debt.
Absolutely. Yeah, pay that down, start to build your emergency savings and then move on to investing. There are steps involved, but I
Yeah,
I feel that people just jump to the investing side,
yeah.
but it's really important to make sure that they do have those basics first. And we talked about this a little bit, living within your means and developing sound habits. What I find is that people are very good, and this goes back to the behavioral economics piece. People are very good at saving for the short term. They're not
Mhm.
very good at saving for the long term. So if you're saying you're going on, a weekend trip in January, oh, I can get a couple of $100, excuse me, together for that. That's not a problem. But if you ask them to put away a couple of $100 for their future self, that seems like no way I could do that.
Yeah, and it's human nature. It's yeah, too judgmental because it's been a problem that's as old as time. It's very difficult for
Mm-hmm.
people, and I think especially young people who are young and healthy and full of life and such great high hopes for what life has in store for them, to imagine what it would be like when they're older. And a lot of the times I would say, well, think about your parents, think about your grandparents. Imagine yourself when you're as old as that person. And the extent to which a person can actually visualize themselves as being that older person correlates with their ability to actually make decisions that are in keeping with being that older person down the road. And whatever you can do, I mean, whatever works, it's useful.
Absolutely. Um, any other final thoughts on basic financial literacy, something that you wish you would have known, or something you take away from your experiences?
Start early. So for the people in your audience, you're doing the work, you're on the side of the angels. You're getting young people to think about financial literacy at the point in their life when it is most needed in many ways, because as I say, it's foundational. And if you can have the foundation in place, it sets the stage for all that follows thereafter. So if you're interested enough to read a book, I would say I don't want to recommend any specific books, but there are lots of books
Mhm.
that are at whatever level that deal with personal finance. And again, personal finance is not limited to investing. If you're ready to invest, then by all means read a book on investing. But a lot of people would be better off reading a book about basic financial planning and getting to the point where all their ducks in a row so that they can begin to invest. But
Mhm.
you know, before you do that, you've got to have your ability to maintain your cash flow. And so read a book, speak to someone that you trust, maybe a college professor, maybe it's an uncle who's done well in life and who
Mhm.
would say, I wish I had someone pull me aside when I was 20 to tell me, I wish I knew then what I know now. And if you can find someone who
Absolutely.
you think, yeah, if you can find someone who you believe in your circle knows their way around personal finance, don't be afraid to, sit that person down and have an adult beverage and bring a notebook and just sort of say, so what should I know? What am I missing? What do I not know? You don't know what you don't know. So you don't even know
Mm.
what questions to ask. A lot of what you should be doing is being open-ended and probing with a real intent of learning and implementing what you learn with someone who has been around the block, who knows their way around personal finance, and say, all right, I want to be a sponge. I want to do this right. I'm concerned about my own financial future. What should I be doing? What am I missing? What are the pitfalls? If there were two things that you could avoid, what would they be? And then just sit and listen and take your notes and do what you can to act on them.
Absolutely. Such great information. Thank you, John, so much for being with us. Again, I am Dr. Catherine Gilstein, and you've been listening to Your 18 Now What. So continue to listen, like, and share. And you can visit my website at your18nowwhat.com to get all the latest on information and updated podcasts as well. Thanks so much. I appreciate you. Have a great day.